Right, today we're looking at chapter 14 of Messiaen's Techniques of My Musical Language, another episode of Decomposing Messiaen, a whole series where we're walking through that book and kind of exploring the ideas that Messiaen documents and captures about his own compositional process. At the same time, along the way, take the opportunity to explore larger questions about music and spirituality, and always looking for opportunities to pause and reflect on those broader aesthetic or philosophical questions. And it's easy to do with Messiaen because he himself takes those pauses. And with books like this, like the Techniques, where the book is as much about his thinking on the place of sound and harmony and rhythm in the universe, in the cosmos. I mean, he really does have this exuberant, ecstatic quality to his thinking about music. And I take every opportunity I can to pause and also think like that. So chapter 14 is a particularly dense chapter. He's dealing with special chords that are meaningful to him. So he talks about the construction of those chords. He talks about chord clusters, and he talks about progressions, and each of those is kind of a subject unto itself. Today, we're going to talk about the construction of two particular chords, the chord on the dominant, and then what he calls the resonant chord, and dig into how those chords are constructed and how they're used. And one of the ways that they're used is this idea of inversion. Now, inversion, of course, is a very common musical term. It is the restatement of chords with the notes of that chord in different positions, in different inversions, depending on what's on the bottom and what's on the top. When we look at the examples of what Messiaen calls inversion, you'll see that he's including really three processes. And I'll go over these now, but we're going to go into a lot more detail when I turn around and get to the piano. First, of course, the root is moved into the chord, but he moves it into the middle of the chord, not the top of the chord. That's because he's particularly interested in the voicing of the chords as the definition of the chord. And second, he transposes down the chord so that there's a common base. So when he talks about inversion, he's usually talking about it in the terms of a progression, and he's particularly interested in having a progression that shares a common base. And so again, we'll get into all of that, but just as an overview of what to expect. We'll start with the chord on the dominant, and then move to the resonant chords. I keep looking over my shoulder here, or over the camera here, to these puppies. This is actually the third time that I've tried to record this. The first time, on Saturday, I had to stop because in the middle of it, one of them, that one, bit through an electric cord. Can you fucking believe that? Chord under the piano. A chord under the piano. We very carefully went through the house and we got these puppies and found what we thought were all of the exposed cables, and either moved them or unplugged them or covered them. But behind that bookshelf here, the one with the bobblehead Bach, there, behind there is an extension cord with a single plug in it, and the stupid little dog chewed right through. The sound that he made, I mean, he's fine, and I can laugh about it now, but not at the time, because he got a shock from household current. Anyway, and then I tried to do it again yesterday, and I had the shot at the piano, and for the entire duration of that shot, all you could see was my beard. And I don't mind if all you can see are my hands, or if you can see, me and my hands, but I didn't want to just show like this view here. That seemed a bit disorienting. So, chapter 14. Where did I put my glasses? There they are. Chapter 14. Chords spéciaux, special chords, grappes d'accords, clusters of chords, a liste d'enchaînement d'accords, lists of chord progressions. When we get to those, it's interesting because what Messiaen has done is create kind of a small textbook of canonical chord progressions, very similar to how we study four-part Bach chorale-style writing in like Western college music theory. It would be very interesting, and in fact, when I get to this, I'm going to try and do this, to approach each of the examples that he gives with that in mind. He doesn't give a whole lot of explanatory text, so I'm thinking maybe, what if I were to write that for each of them to describe what it does and where you might use that kind of a progression. So if that sounds interesting, here's where I'm going to plug the subscription to the channel. All right, a chord sur dominant, chord on the dominant. The dominant is the fifth of the scale. So in C major, that's G. And in fact, you can see in 201 that the chord has a root on G. Now, the first rule is that it starts on G. The second rule for the chord is that it includes all of the notes in the major scale, the C major scale. But of course, there's any number of ways that I can meet at least that requirement. The chord on the dominant has a specific voicing that Messiaen maintains in his definition of it. And the way to count that, or the way to describe that, is as a series of half steps. So the chord on the dominant is actually 2, 3, 2, 3, 6, 5. So how do I get to that? Well, okay, G to A is 1, 2, right? A to C is 3, 1, 2, 3. C to D, of course, is 2, 2. Then D to F is 3. Right? So you have 2, 3, 2, 3. And then F to B is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. And then up to E is 5. 1, 2, 3, 4. And those interval points are necessary for the chord to be considered the chord on the dominant in Messiaen's definition here. It would not be sufficient to move those notes around. Then you are dealing with a cluster rather than the dominant chord. With that chord, it's a very beautiful chord. Messiaen will add an approach to that chord, to the stepwise appoggiatura, which is what he shows in 203. So the definition of the chord begins on the G. It contains all of the notes of the major scale, and it is often approached by that stepwise appoggiatura. It's very important to consider the appoggiatura as part of the progression of the dominant chord. All right, fair enough so far. Now we're in example 204. And I have to say, when I first tried to figure this out, I really was I really struggled a little bit. I've been quite meticulous in reverse engineering what I think we should take away from this example. And it may be too pedantic, it may be redundant, it may be apparent to everybody, but it is one of those things that I just had to keep working through this to really understand what he's doing. Because here's what he says, right? A multicolored style, an effet de vitrail, stained glass, disposons les différents renversements de l'accord. The different renversements is the different inversions. Remember, an inversion, when I first hear the word inversion, is the same pitches, arranged in a different order. First thing you learn, it's what the inversions of the chords are. But let me play through 204, And he's describing this as the inversion of the dominant chord. So there's a lot going on. So it begins and ends with the same chord. But aside from that, how can we piece this together so that it makes sense as a chord progression of an inversion of the same chord? So let's reverse engineer this. First, each of these chords includes the appoggiatura approach. So here's the chord, and then here's the appoggiatura and the chord, okay? And then the appoggiatura and the chord, and then the appoggiatura and the chord, and the appoggiatura and the chord. Now, in some cases, the appoggiatura of the chord is the same as the resolution of the first chord. So, for example, this is just an observation that I think helps tie things together. The top two notes of the root chord here are F natural and B flat. And the notes of the appoggiatura of the second chord are E sharp and A sharp, which are the enharmonic spellings, enharmonic equivalent of the same notes. But the chords that we're looking at, and we'll just look at the first two here, which is the left hand and then the second interval, and then here we go. So that's the relationship that Messiaen is calling an inversion. All right. How do we arrive at that? Well, let's first look at the chord here. So the root is what? It's C sharp, which is the dominant of F sharp major. Which is a great this is actually my favorite fugue. The prelude is nice too. Yeah. F sharp major. Very good. So F sharp major, the scale. Let's look at the chord and just see where the notes are. So F sharp, G sharp, A sharp. Well, B flat, right? It's close enough. B natural, C sharp, D sharp, and E sharp is our F natural. So yes, the criteria of the chord exist in the sense that we have a chord that starts on the root, includes every note in the major scale. Now, do we have our 2, 3, 2, 3, 6, 5? Well, let's see. C sharp to D sharp is 2. D sharp to F sharp is 3. 2, 3. F sharp to G sharp, 2. It's looking good. G sharp to B, 3. And then to E sharp or F is 1, 2, 3, 4, 6. And then up to B flat, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So there we go. We have our root position chord on the dominant. Now, we invert that here, and here are the notes that he's inverted. C sharp, E, F sharp, A, B, D, G. Now, how do we arrive at that? Well, we arrived at it by doing the inversion and then transposing down so that the lowest note of the inverted chord becomes the root. So what would the inversion actually look like if I was to just follow a more standard, if I was to dig into my college freshman theory and think about inversion, I know I wanted to start on D sharp. I'm going to put the C sharp in the middle because I know that's what Messiaen does. So, what are these intervals? Well, C sharp, sorry, so D sharp to F sharp. So I'm getting confused. I'm twisting myself in knots to do all this, but I want to be very meticulous about this. F sharp to G sharp is 2, so we've got 3, 2, and then up to B is 3, and then to C sharp is 2. So we've got, instead of 3, 2, 3, we've got instead of a 2, 3, 2, we've got a 3, 2, 3, 2. Then C sharp to F, right, is 4, which is not an interval that's in the root chord. And then F to B flat is our 5, which is what we ended up before. So the 6, really, the inner voiced 6 interval of the root has been replaced by this 4. If that makes sense, right? Then when we transpose down, now because I want these to begin on a shared bass note, I'm going to bump them down a whole step, keeping that same interval. So the question is, these are the notes in the example. So here's my 3, 1, 2, 3, and then my 2, and then my 3, and then my 2, and then the 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, and then the 5, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So the first inversion maintains the shared bass, and that is how we arrive at the progression, and the same process continues through the other inversions. Get that right. Now, what's interesting when Messiaen writes about these inversions, here's our root, it's our first inversion, and our second inversion, and then we would expect to have a root with the G sharp. The third inversion, Messiaen doesn't use that. He doesn't document it, and he doesn't use it. He goes to the fourth inversion. And I haven't found anywhere where it explains why. Neither have I found anyone who explains what they think why either, except maybe that third inversion sounds too much like one of the other modes. But I don't really know. But when you look into the later writings, not in the techniques, but later when Messiaen wrote a much larger treatise on harmony, he never refers to the third inversion. He skips root, first, second, fourth. So, a useful piece of trivia to keep track of and bring up at the next pub quiz. All right, so just to wrap up, the other use, Messiaen will throw it all together, meaning he'll add the appoggiatura into the note, into the chords. And then you get these very rich harmonies. I think what we'll do is take a break here, come back and do the resonant harmony, which is Messiaen's interpretation of the overtone series in a harmonic gesture. We'll do that. We'll do that next time. So hang tight for that next week. If you have any questions, drop me a note, a comment below, or if you want to chastise me privately, zenglob@gmail.com.